During World War II, hidden deep in the forests of eastern Poland, the Nazis built a place unlike any other. A place where almost no one walked down alive. In May 1942, Sobibor opened its gates. Thousands of men, women, and children arrived, believing they were headed for a new future. Instead, they were stepping straight into a death trap. By the time the camp was torn down in late 1943, nearly 250,000 lives had been erased, and the world had barely heard a whisper of it. The Nazis started building Sobibor in March 1942. At this time, World War II was at its peak, and Hitler's men were pushing their cruel plans harder than ever. Sobibor was part of something they called Operation Reinhard, which was the secret plan to wipe out all the Jews living in Poland. They named it after Reinhard Heydrich, a top Nazi leader who helped plan the Holocaust before he was assassinated in 1942. Sobibor wasn't just another camp. It was built only for killing. It wasn't like Auschwitz, where some prisoners were forced to work before dying. Sobibor had just one job: murder as many people as fast as possible. It was one of the 3 main death camps under Operation Reinhard. The other 2 were Belzec and Treblinka, both just as deadly. The Nazis picked a very hidden spot for Sobibor. It was near a tiny Polish village, also called Sobibor, close to the Bug River and not far from the border of Ukraine. It was in the middle of thick forests and swamps. There were no big cities nearby. This made it easier for the Nazis to carry out mass murder without anyone seeing or stopping them. The location also had another advantage. It was close to railway lines. The Nazis could easily transport Jews from all over Europe straight to Sobibor by train. Thousands of people could be brought in, killed, and buried without anyone outside knowing what happened. Construction was done quickly. Nazi officers, German engineers, and forced Jewish laborers helped build the camp. Once it was ready, it looked more like a small military base from the outside. There were fences, guard towers, and paths leading straight to death. The Nazis even planted trees and bushes around the camp to hide it better from airplanes flying overhead. The camp officially opened in May 1942. It didn't take long before the killing machine was running at full speed. The man put in charge was Franz Stangl, an Austrian Nazi officer. He had worked in other places where the Nazis killed disabled people during their so-called euthanasia programs. He already knew how to organize mass murder. Later, he became even more famous and hated for running the Treblinka death camp, where even more people were killed. Stangl wasn't working alone. His right-hand man at Sobibor was Gustav Wagner, another Austrian. Wagner was known for being extremely cruel and violent. Prisoners said he was always looking for reasons to beat or kill someone. And sometimes, he didn't even need a reason. Another important officer at Sobibor was Karl Frenzel, a German who was also ruthless towards the prisoners. The camp itself was divided into 3 main parts, almost like different worlds. Camp 1 was where the Nazi officers and guards lived. There were barracks, kitchens, and small workshops. Camp 2 was a terrible place. It was where new prisoners arrived after getting off the trains. Camp 3 was the real heart of horror. It was completely hidden behind high fences and trees. Here were the gas chambers and the mass graves. Once prisoners were forced through Camp 2, they were marched straight into Camp 3. Very few people ever even saw Camp 3 and lived to tell about it. It was the final stop for almost everyone who entered Sobibor. Most prisoners arrived at Sobibor by train. These trains were packed with Jewish families. Some trains came from nearby areas in Poland, but many traveled from farther away, places like France, Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and the Netherlands. The rides were brutal. People were squeezed into cattle cars with no food, no water, and barely any air. Many didn't even survive the trip. When the trains finally stopped at Sobibor, the prisoners were exhausted, confused, and scared. But the Nazis had a cruel trick ready for them. Right away, Nazi officers and Ukrainian guards started shouting orders. They told the prisoners that they had arrived at a resettlement camp. They said the people would be given food, jobs, and a new place to live. The prisoners were told they first needed to take showers and have their clothes disinfected. To make it seem believable, the Nazis even had fake signs posted saying things like bathhouse, disinfection area. Sometimes they even had prisoners sweep the paths and keep the place looking clean to trick new arrivals into thinking everything was normal. The victims were split into groups. Men were separated from women and children. Guards forced everyone to strip completely naked and leave their clothes and valuables in neat piles. Many prisoners were told to remember where they put their things because they would be coming back to get them after their showers. But of course, there would be no return. After stripping, the prisoners were forced to march down a narrow, fenced-off path that the Nazis called the Tube. This path led straight into the gas chambers. The buildings looked like simple, small houses with doors and fake shower heads inside, but there was no plumbing, only pipes connected to a large engine outside. Once people were crammed inside the gas chambers, the doors were sealed shut. Then deadly carbon monoxide gas coming from a captured Soviet tank engine was pumped into the rooms. Within minutes, everyone inside was dead. People suffocated painfully, but it happened so fast that the Nazis could kill hundreds of people in just one day. At its busiest, Sobibor's gas chambers could kill around 600 people at once. The Nazis packed as many victims as they could into the chambers to speed up the killings. Sometimes they managed to kill up to 1,500 people in a single day. It was like a terrible factory of death, running almost non-stop. Between May 1942 and October 1943, around 250,000 people were murdered at Sobibor. Most of them were Jews, but Romani people and a few Soviet prisoners of war were also killed there. Every transport brought hundreds or thousands more victims. Train after train, day after day, the killing never seemed to slow down. Some days were even worse than others. When big transports arrived from places like the Netherlands or Czechoslovakia, the camp had to kill even faster. The Nazis sometimes worked all night just to process the new arrivals. The people in charge kept track of the numbers. To them, it was just math. More trains meant more deaths. The people who were forced to work inside Sobibor were called the Sonderkommando. These were mostly young, strong Jewish men who were picked right off the trains. The Nazis chose them because they needed workers who could handle heavy, horrible tasks. Dragging bodies out of the gas chambers, pulling out gold teeth, cutting hair, and digging or burning mass graves. These workers knew something awful. Their job only gave them a little more time to live. They lived every day knowing that once they became weak or sick, the Nazis would kill them too, and bring in new prisoners to take their place. It was a nightmare. They couldn't escape. Life inside Sobibor was full of endless pain and fear. The prisoners were treated worse than animals. They were beaten for no reason. They were kicked, slapped, whipped, and sometimes shot just because the guards were bored or angry. Food was almost nothing. Starvation made them weak, but being too weak meant death. The camp officers were especially brutal. Gustav Wagner was known as one of the cruelest. Prisoners said he would walk around looking for any excuse to kill someone. Maybe a prisoner didn't bow fast enough. Maybe they looked at him the wrong way. Maybe they stumbled while carrying something heavy. For Wagner, it didn't matter. He would beat or shoot prisoners on the spot. The other one, Karl Frenzel, treated prisoners like dirt and nobody ever felt safe around him. Even when the prisoners weren't working, they lived in terrible conditions. They were crammed into barracks with no heat in the winter and no proper toilets. Disease spread fast. There was no medicine. If someone got sick, they usually died or were shot by the guards for being unfit to work. The prisoners lived every second in horror. They saw death all around them. They smelled burning bodies every day. They heard the screams of people being gassed. And worst of all, they knew that no matter how hard they worked, no matter how much they obeyed, they too would eventually be killed. In early 1943, the Nazis decided to make Sobibor even more deadly. They weren't killing people fast enough for their evil plans, so they started making changes to the camp. The gas chambers were expanded to fit more people inside at once. The Nazis wanted the process to be quicker and more efficient. At the same time, the Nazis realized that burying the bodies was causing problems. The mass graves were so full that bones and body parts started sticking out of the ground. Sometimes the smell was so horrible that even the guards complained. Plus, there was always the risk that someone might discover the graves one day and expose their crimes. So the Nazis gave a new order: dig up all the old graves and burn the bodies. Prisoners were forced to open the mass graves and pull out thousands of decaying corpses. It was one of the worst jobs imaginable. The bodies were then stacked like wood and set on fire. Huge fires that burned day and night. The smell of burning flesh was everywhere. It filled the air for miles and miles. Even people living in distant villages outside the forest noticed the sickening smell and thick, black smoke. But few dared to ask questions. Everyone was too afraid. The Nazis also built special structures to help with the burning. They made big grids out of iron rails, where they could pile bodies on top and light them up like massive human bonfires. Prisoners who worked in these burning crews lived in total horror, knowing that one day they would probably end up on the fires themselves. By mid-1943, life at Sobibor was getting even worse. The prisoners noticed that fewer trains were arriving. They knew that meant fewer new workers. And they also knew what usually happened next. At other camps, when the work was done, the Nazis killed all the prisoners to erase witnesses. The prisoners at Sobibor realized they were running out of time. If they didn't act soon, they would all be dead. That's when a brave Jewish prisoner named Leon Feldhendler stepped forward. He had been thinking about escape for months. Feldhendler knew they couldn't just run for it. The guards had guns, the fences were high, and the camp was surrounded by mines. They would need a real plan, something smart, something careful. But Feldhendler couldn't do it alone. He needed help, especially someone with military experience who knew how to organize a real fight. That help came in September 1943, when a new group of prisoners arrived. Among them were several Soviet Jewish soldiers who had been captured by the Germans. One of them was Lieutenant Alexander Pachursky. He was tough, smart, and not easily scared. Pachursky had fought in real battles against the Germans before being captured, and he still had the spirit of a fighter. Feldhendler and Pachursky met secretly. They talked about the situation. They knew it was almost hopeless, but doing nothing meant certain death. Together they started putting together a daring plan, a plan to rise up, fight back, and escape from the camp of death. On October 14, 1943, the plan finally went into action. The uprising started quietly. Prisoners who had been assigned work all over the camp began secretly killing SS officers, one by one. They used whatever they could find: knives, axes, hammers, and even work tools. They tried to make it look normal so the other guards wouldn't notice right away. The idea was simple: kill as many Nazi officers as possible before anyone realized what was happening. They especially targeted the guards who had the keys to the armory and the main gates. If they could get guns and open the way out, they had a real chance. But soon chaos broke out. One of the bodies was discovered too soon, and the alarms started blaring. Guards ran to their posts, shouting and firing their guns. The prisoners knew they had no more time to sneak. They had to run. Hundreds of prisoners made a desperate dash for the fences. Some climbed the barbed wire. Others tried to cut it down. Guards opened fire with rifles and machine guns. It was a nightmare. And to make things even worse, the Nazis had buried mines all around the camp to stop escapes. As prisoners ran across the field, explosions went off. Some were blown apart. Others kept running through the smoke and gunfire. Around 300 prisoners made it past the fences and into the nearby forests. They scattered in all directions, hoping to hide among the trees. They knew the forests better than the Germans and hoped to find help from local villagers, or at least survive on their own. Sadly, many of the escapees were later hunted down. The Nazis sent soldiers, dogs, and police units to track them. Some were captured right away. Others survived for days or even weeks before being caught. In the end, only about 50 to 60 escapees survived the war. Even though most were killed, the uprising was still an incredible act of courage. After the uprising, the Nazis were furious. They were embarrassed that prisoners had defeated them, even just for one day. They knew the camp was no longer a secret. Soldiers were out there, ready to tell the world what had happened inside Sobibor. The Nazis decided to shut the camp down completely. They ordered the gas chambers destroyed. They tore down the buildings, ripped out the fences, and even tried to dig up and burn more bodies to erase all traces of their crimes. After that, they planted trees all over the area to cover it up. By the end of 1943, Sobibor had totally vanished from sight. To anyone passing by, it just looked like another piece of quiet forest. No signs, no buildings, and no graves. It was as if the killing factory had never been there at all. But the truth couldn't stay buried. Very few of the Nazi officers from Sobibor were punished. Franz Stangl escaped to Brazil and lived there until he was arrested in 1967. He was sentenced to life in prison in 1970 and died the next year. Gustav Wagner also ran to Brazil. He was arrested in 1978, but found dead in 1980, supposedly a suicide. Karl Frenzel was captured in Germany in 1966 and sentenced to life in 1967, but was released early and lived until 1996. Most of the Ukrainian guards who helped the Nazis were never punished at all. In the 1960s and 70s, researchers began learning more about Sobibor. Survivors spoke out, telling their painful stories. Archaeologists started digging at the site, finding remains of the gas chambers, mass graves, and small personal items like jewelry, glasses, and shoes. Each tiny object told the story of someone who never got to live their life. Today, Sobibor has a simple memorial. There are no big museums or fancy displays, just quiet markers, a mass grave, and a few signs. It's a place for sadness and remembrance. The countries hit hardest by Sobibor included Poland, the Netherlands, France, Germany, Austria, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. From the Netherlands alone, about 34,000 Jews were sent to Sobibor. Almost none survived. In one transport from France, over 1,000 Jews were sent to Sobibor, including many orphaned children. Only a handful of adults survived after escaping or hiding. Many people today still don't know about Sobibor. It didn't have huge buildings like Auschwitz. It didn't have many survivors. But the pain and evil there were just as real.